And just so everybody knows, we discussed the income-based tax exemptions at the last meeting. What the board wound up doing, in case anybody doesn't know, is they went with the new income levels that are halfway between what the current levels were and the new maximum levels. If you remember, the vote among the committee was 11 people voted to go all the way 100%, 9 were at the 50%, and the board chose to do the 50%. So that's in place for the 24-25 school year. And then we'll see how that goes down the road. That can always get changed next year, the year after, whatever. So that's all I have for right now, and I'll turn it over to Aaron. So it's all yours.
Hi, good evening, welcome. Thank you for having me here this evening. Thank you, Mr. Carlson and Dr. Scanlon, Ms. Rosenzweig, for having me here to present tonight, for the members of the BAC for coming out on this rainy night. I know the weather's been a hindrance to the committee. My predecessor, Dr. Dawn Mason, had presented to the BAC last year, and I know she had given an extremely comprehensive presentation last year on PPS. And if you have had a chance to review that, that's fantastic. If you have not, I would definitely encourage you to look at the old presentations that are on the website to help gain some information. I'm going to cover a little bit about what she discussed, just because it's relevant to what I'd like to talk about tonight, but it's very informative. So PPS, who are we? PPS has actually changed. So who were we and who are we now? The district made a decision last year to combine two positions when Dr. Mason retired. My former role as Executive Director of Student Community Services was actually combined with Dr. Mason's role as Assistant to the Superintendent of PPS. So her role last year included the column on the left, the who are we. We were psychologists, special ed teachers, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, behavior consultants, instructional diagnosticians, and nurses. Now this year, we've added 3 departments. We've added the social workers district-wide K-12, we've added the K-12 guidance department, and we've added student services, my former role, which also happened to include SAC and enrichment as well. So we've grown. So we're a bigger department now than we were last year. Our administrative team. So we're a big department, as Mr. Carlson was saying. We represent a large part of the district's students and staff. I'm Erin Connolly, Assistant to the Superintendent of PPS. Sarah Kirsch resumed the role of Director of Student Services and Community Partnerships. Laurence Marino is the Assistant Director of People Personnel. Jim Geis is our Supervisor, and he's also the Principal of our ESY program. Maureen Reyes is our Coordinating Chairperson of Special Education, and Nathan Jane is our Coordinating Chairperson of Guidance. And here's our lead teaching staff. With a big department, it requires a lot of layers. So our lead speech teacher is Terry McCrave. Amy Poulos is our lead guidance counselor at Murphy. Anthony DeTero, who you know here, is our lead guidance counselor at Delinas. Christine Scheifel, social worker, district-wide. Jose Salazar, district-wide psychologist. Kim Halter is our lead behavior consultant. Virginia McCaffrey, Melissa Levinson, and Lolita Portal-Pfeffer are our lead PPS staff at our secondary schools. And our clerical team, who none of us could do anything without. In student services, you can see Veronica Hammer, Melissa Noko, and Mary Sackler, and then the strong PPS services clerical team led by Donna Pesapane here as well, with Deborah D'Onofrio, Danielle Veroline, Joanne Whalen, Linda Miller, Diane Riley, Donna O'Reilly, Felicia Zara, Jessica Leahy, and Lisa Rodriguez. So just us alone, we're a big group. So our teaching staff, and what do we consist of, to give you an idea? We are 80 special education teachers, 19 speech pathologists, 21 guidance counselors, 18 nurses, 13 social workers, 13 psychologists. That includes a transition coordinator and a 504 chairperson, 5 instructional diagnosticians, 4 behavior consultants, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, and 70 child care assistants through the SAC program. So now that you know the scope of our department, what's included in People Personnel Services other than our staff? What kind of services do we provide to our students and our community? So at the top, we our 504 plans, we are CPSE and we are CSE, and that's primarily what I think people think of when they think of PPS. To give you an idea of the scope, so 504 is CPSE and CSE meetings. Each year, any student who has an IEP or a 504 plan has an annual review. They'll have a meeting. Last year, in the 22-23 school year, the district, our department, did over 2,000 meetings for 504 CPSE and CSE. We actually did 2,090 meetings in the 22-23 school year. All of those meetings require a lot of preparation, and then the debrief on the other side and the paperwork that comes with that. But we are cross-contract students. We are educationally related support services. We call that ERS. We are extended school year. That's our summer program. We're required by the state to run our ESY program. We're required to do 30 days in the summer. And as I said before, Mr. Geis is the principal of our summer program. That's for identified students who need support services over the summer to prevent regression. We're home component. Many of our students receive services at home. Even students who attend school who need additional support beyond the school day receive home component. And then some of our students are homebound and receive their instruction at home. We are hospitalized and incarcerated youth. We write and support and prepare the IDEA grants, the 611 and the 619 grants. We provide manifestation hearings for students, material, supplies, equipments, things like FM trainers, augmentative communication devices, things like that come through our department. We're Medicaid, we're NYSHA for our alternately assessed students. We provide nursing services. That is for our students in the building level, but it's also for our more impaired students who require individual nursing services throughout the school day. We provide parent training. A lot of our parents on the student's IEP require parental support as they work with their own child, so we have trainers that come into the house that work with our families. We support students in foster care. We do transition planning. As I stated before, we have a full-time psychologist who acts as a transition coordinator for the district. We are DASA, the Dignity for All Students Act. Sarah Kirsch is our district-wide DASA coordinator for the district. That's the anti-bullying legislation that was enacted about 20 years ago. We're McKinney-Vento, which is the Homeless Act that provides supports for students who are homeless. And then we're our special ed programs on top of all of that. So our district special ed programs span kindergarten through age 22. And that has an asterisk because that's new this year. Legislation that occurred in this past school year from New York State now requires us to educate students until the day before their 22nd birthday. So previous legislation was students would complete the year in which they turned 21. So if they turned 21 in September, they could stay in school until June of that school year. Now, if they turn 22 in September, the day before their 22nd birthday, they would exit. And then we're related services, again, through age 22. That includes things like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language, counseling as a related service, and things like that. So our special education data, let me make sure I'm in the right spot here. As you can see, our special education classification rate has stayed at pretty much consistently 14% for the last 10 years. So as our enrollment has declined over the years, our classification rate has remained steady. So you can see the total number of classified students each year. In 2012-13, there were 907, I mean, you can't read it, it's probably far, 972 Three-Village students who were classified 11 years ago. Last year, the number was down to 780, and this year we have approximately 746 classified students. And each year, actually, we have a number of students who we don't classify. So we have about an average, in the last 5 years, it's about an average of 50 students a year who we go through the whole referral process, who actually are deemed ineligible for services. And that's important to mention also because it's as if we're doing all the work to prepare for a meeting and to do all the testing for our students who either a family member or a staff member has requested a referral for a child, and then we do not end up classifying that child. So then we will look to provide different types of supports through our RTI continuum at the building level. So least restrictive environment. It's important for us to discuss this because this is really the guiding principle for IDEA, our Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. LRE plays a really critical role in determining not only where a student spends their time in school, but also how special education services will be provided. So this guides all of our conversation about special education. LRE is determined on a case-by-case basis. It's individualized during the development of a child's IEP. And the LRE involves making program decisions about what services and supports a student needs to be successful, and how and where those services and supports can be provided effectively. So the least restrictive environment requirement within IDEA requires school districts for students with disabilities to receive their education alongside their peers without disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate. So that's very important. Students should not be removed from the general education classroom unless learning cannot be achieved even with the use of supplementary aids and services. So that drives the entire conversation at a CSE LRE. So this is what the continuum of services looks like in New York State. So you can see at the bottom that consultant teacher services are the least restrictive environment that we could provide for a student. It's also considered, and for us it is, the least expensive model. And at the top, most restrictive is our state-approved private schools, which are the most restrictive because they don't provide students with the opportunity to work alongside their general education peers. School districts are required to provide this continuum, access to all these programs on the continuum, with the exception of one in the middle, the integrated co-teaching. It's the only optional placement. We currently have a DTC model, the direct teacher consult model, here in Three Village. So the consultant teacher services is the model we provide for our DTC students. So these are the current programs, our self-contained programs, or our ALC programs that we provide in the district. Just wanted to give you an idea of what that looks like district-wide. We do not provide every program in every school, but we do have a nice complement throughout the district to support our students. Arrowhead, we have 7 self-contained classes at Arrowhead. 5 of them are 811 classes. 2 of those are ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis sections, and 2 1211 classes. Minnesota has 2 1211 classes. Nassau has Group 8 and a 1211. Murphy has an 8, Jolinas has an 8 and a 12, and Ward Melville has 2 811s and 2 1211s. It's important to note that with our self-contained classes, the state only allows us to have a 3-year age span. Those students who are in those classes are non-graded. They have been evaluated under NYSHA and are determined that they're non-graded. So we are allowed to put students within a 3-year age span in one classroom environment together, but we can't exceed that by even a day. So we don't have an option about adding an additional student if their birthday does not fall within range of a specific class. And then we have our 15-1 programs at our secondary level. That's in addition to our smaller ratioed classes. At 7th, 8th, and 9th grade at both junior high schools, we offer a 15-1 program, and at the high school as well, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, we have 15-1 programs, and they're spread out. So our DTC, that's our direct teacher consult model. You can see we have 14 elementary sections across the 5 of our elementary schools. 1 kindergarten section, 1 first grade section, 2 second grade sections, a 3rd grade section, 4 4th grade, 3 5th grade, and 3 6th grade sections. And then when you get to the secondary level, we have DTC about 2 sections per grade level per subject in our 7 through 12 classes. But as you can see, we do not have DTC on every grade level in every elementary school. Our programs are developed based on building needs and look to complement the home school of the identified students. Resource room is available in every building for students in all grade levels. And just to give you an idea, this year we support just over 300 students in a resource room. So what's changed? The past 5 years, we've seen significant changes, I think, in all aspects of our lives, and our schools are no different. While our percentage of classified and supported students has remained steady, how we support those students has changed. We've seen a need for an increased level of support required for our students to meet academic benchmarks in the past 5 years, particularly since COVID. COVID has had a significant impact on all our students, including students in our primary grade levels. The younger bubble of students who were babies and toddlers during the height of COVID are now between 4 and 9 years old. In the past 2 to 3 years, we're seeing an increased need to support these students in all of our grade levels, including our pre-K program. Our staff have noticed that there's an increased number of students who struggle to maintain sustained attention span, and time on task is a challenge. There's a marked increase in referrals for speech and language evaluations. Students entering kindergarten, many of whom who did not have access to early intervention or formalized preschool during COVID, are quickly being identified by staff. Speech referrals to special education have increased. We know that mask wearing deeply impacted language development and acquisition for our young learners during COVID. Early intervention services and supports were not readily available as well during that time, and now finding providers due to the increased numbers of students who require supports is extremely challenging. The effects of these environmental factors will certainly be something that schools will have to contend with as we look to support our learners. So I want to show you what those increases look like for us. We're going to look at some data on occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, and behavior consult numbers. So occupational therapy needs district-wide in the last 5 years. So you can see in 2019-20, 22% of our classified students received some type of occupational therapy supports. Now, this school year, that number is at 27%. So it's an increase of 5% in the last 5 years. So that's a pretty steep climb. Our physical therapy needs, 19-20, 5% of our classified students were receiving some type of physical therapy. Now, this year, we're closer to 8% of our classified students who are receiving some type of physical therapy supports. Our speech language needs district-wide. You can see, again, 2019-20, about 45%, and this school year, we're at 50%. So 50% of our classified students receive some type of speech language supports, and 2/3 of those are at our elementary level. Our behavior consultant needs district-wide. This is actually our steepest increase. In 2019-20, 11% of our classified students receive behavioral supports from either district or contracted services staff. This year, we're up to 17%, which is significant. So as you can see, the percentage of classified students has remained consistent over the last 10, 11 years, but how we support those students has increased. So a classified student in 2012 might not need all the related service supports, and now we're seeing that we need to increase the way that we support and add additional supports to our students in order for them to find success and meet the academic benchmarks that they need to be successful in the school environment. It's definitely placed new demands on our classrooms and schools, and it's requiring us to provide a greater level of support for our students. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you.
But the question, when you say that increase, the 5%, 6%, around anywhere from 5 to 6% in all those charts increase since COVID. What do you think is the contributing factor to why that increase within? Is it from the COVID year? Was there similar increases previous to that, or was
You know
it
what, I
just
didn't look back that far. That's a great question, and maybe I could if that's something that the committee wanted me to explore further. I chose to start with the 5-year mark, as that was the year prior to COVID, and just look at the last 5 years and what we've seen, but that would be an interesting thing to look at.
Oh, just because I think that's similar to what we have experienced, you know, not just in special education, but with student services across the board. There's been an increase in an escalation of need, and I don't know if it's solely COVID related or it's just the time, so I just didn't know if you had that before.
And Aaron, do you see that as a continuum through, over the years as they move through the program? Is it a bell curve? Does it drop off, or is it a straightforward support all the way through?
Yeah, so I can't answer that specifically to that with data, because I didn't look at that. I think anecdotally, we know here that when we provide services and supports for students, especially early on, that we can help students have a significant amount of academic success. So that's something I know that we're all very proud of. But I definitely think that the times are changing. And I do think that one of the things that we've talked about a lot in our department is the number of speech language evaluations that are being requested at the primary grade levels, because we know that kids are coming in and the lack of maybe a formalized education during their formative primary years, or without having the early intervention services and supports. When you delay that, then you could see a greater impact over time.
We're also witnessing that number during the COVID years. During that year, approximately about 200 students came to us from across many different places. The city was mostly, we had about 150 students alone in New York City that came to Three Village. Out of the 150 students, 87 of them were IEPs.
Yep.
So that was a contributing factor to a large spike. And the attraction for many of those families for coming here was we were only one of 3 school districts in Nassau and Suffolk County that had their students in full-time. So that was us, Hauppauge, and Sherwin-Williams River. We were the only ones that did that. And we had the full remote school. We were providing services even to students in the full remote elementary school. So there was no lapse of anything. So once word got out that that was occurring, it was the floodgates opened. The enrollment actually for that year went up by 200 students when we were, over the course of time, we're going down by 200 students, and it went up because of that increase for that. So the fact, that was a contributing factor. Those families have remained. They didn't return back home to wherever they had originated from. They stayed with us and have continued through. A large number of the students that also came during that time didn't come at early elementary levels. They came at secondary levels. So that is, if you look at our cohort data going back, and Laura Pimentel is doing an analysis on this. We started doing this about 12 years ago, and we continued it, and we lapsed during COVID, but we're going back to it again. It's no secret, the longer we have a student in this district, the more successful they become. So, but when we get them at these odd times, as they come in at the different breaks that are traditional in other school districts and not with us, and they come in at those areas, we try to service them as quickly as possible. We make exponential progress in those years, but as the older they get, that progress slows. So we have students in the ranges, now also in particular in E&L, where we're up to 18 SIFE students. A SIFE student is a student with interrupted formal education. That's the highest number we have had ever in our history. So, but it's one of those things where if you build it, they're going to come. They're coming because we had the remote program. We have the special education services. We have a quality E&L program, smaller than other districts, but it's gone up by 50% in the past 10 years as well. So we're ever increasing in these areas, and that's what I keep saying at the meetings that we had last year and the meetings that we've had here, at the demographics of our community, not just from the ethnic and backgrounds, but in these categories have changed us dramatically. And there's potential costs. While the number of students has gone down as our population has gone down, the need of the services of those students has gone up exponentially. And Erin could do the analysis in this as well, is we have many students who receive practically all those services.
Yes.
It's not just one of those services. It's not just speech or OT or PT. It's all of it. So from an elementary teacher's perspective, if we had some of our elementary teachers here who have been in those programs, one of their main issues sometimes is that they often don't get to see the student as often as they wish because of the number of services that we are provided to them. And it's a need, and it's something we have to do. But they're receiving less and less time with their general education classroom peers because of the amount of services that they have to have.
I think it's also important to add that if we have a student that has any type of need or an IEP and they move into the district, like we had a few years ago where we had 87 students with IEPs move in, we have to accept their IEP and we have to place them by law with the program that they come to us in. So we can't say, ooh, that child is really expensive, we have to come up with something different. We don't have another choice. We have to place that student accordingly. So we just had a self-contained student move in the last few weeks. Thankfully, we have room, but we are at capacity now. These classrooms are full. So, you know, that's an issue for us as a district that we have to discuss. But we have to make accommodations for all of those any student that moves in with a need.
What do you mean, what classrooms are full that year at capacity? What level?
A lot of our eights,
At what levels?
most.
Across the board?
We're tight.
And will you have some sort of a cost analysis, examples to show us what numbers we're looking at?
Yeah, yes, I'll go over that when we're done. Yeah.
Obviously, this is a budget advisory committee, to know that it's not like the need drops off as a student moves from kindergarten through elementary through secondary into the high school. It's a continuum. So that funding has to stay with that student all the way through.
Yeah, we also do really try, we kind of joke around sometimes that we are the land of no, that not every child receives every single, available support service, and the goal with least restrictive environment is an important one, and it's why I wanted to stress that, because we all might benefit from some type of support service like that. There's probably a lot of us going, oh, that could really help me, or that would be great. But our obligation is to provide the least amount of support for the child to have the most optimal success. So that's the framework that we always come to at a CSE when they're discussing a child's need. Is we don't want to overdo, because we want the child to be able to step in, and we want them to be able to develop the strategies on their own. So the goal is always to back off as the child is making gains. So, probably, yes, a small part of our population will not make progressive gains where we'll be removing services. But a very large part of our population, especially if we implement services at a young age, will actually not need those as they get older. As I said, our speech numbers in our elementary school level are about 2/3 of our entire speech populations, because when they get to the secondary level, they don't need them as much anymore. So that's a good thing. That means the program is working and that the CSE is doing its job.
I think it's important also, I'm sorry, not to beat a dead horse, but to kind of make that connection, because we often talk about the declining enrollment and why hasn't the budget gone down precipitously when we're looking at a lower population of students. You're making the connection for us that there's a significant need that's, 87 children in 1 year. These costs are real, and I think that connection is important for us to make.
Can I just add? I just want to add to that. In addition, what I have been speaking a little bit about, or a lot about, is that the concern that when the population that we assume is dropping, but the need is increasing, when we're moving into this movement of moving another grade level up to the high school, I have grave concerns, because that number that we talk about, 2,400 or 1,700 now versus 2,400, there's a percentage calculation that doesn't make a lot of sense in my mind because of what you're highlighting, and you're sparking a lot of the things that I've been concerned about. ENL 50% rising, students with severe emotional issues, moving up. So that just makes me reinforces with me that that movement is something I'm really still concerned about.
So we can go over some of the numbers now. I think I said it backwards before. This area, what Erin just went over, is of the 23-24 current year's budget, 17.6%. The other areas that I'll talk about tonight is 37%. So what this is in the line item budget that you have, we gave you a previous meeting from the current year, if you were to look up all these areas that Erin went over tonight, throughout that whole budget, add them all together, this is a summary of all those areas. So we have for 23-24, those are actual budgeted numbers. What's in there for 24-25 is based on current staffing. Now, it's unfortunately, because of the state aid picture we're looking at right now, which we'll talk more about in a minute, we're really in limbo. The state has us in limbo, because we're looking at anywhere from a reduction of state aid of $10 million to maybe not so much of a reduction, or somewhere in between. We have no idea. And, we're prepared if we have to budget and we're going to lose that $10 million, there's nothing we can do about it. So we're ready, but we just don't know that yet. So these 24-25 numbers are based on what we have in place right now. Everything we have in place right now would cost us next year. So that's what these numbers are. So as I said, this is 17.6% of the current year's budget, and it would be a similar percentage of next year's budget as well. But Does anyone have any questions on any of these numbers? As I said, in the line item budget that you have is all the detail on all of this. This is just a summary of all these areas in one page.
So one of the things that you have to be careful when you look at this, we do have a number of students that come from other districts that are on cross contracts with us. So we do receive revenue on those things based upon the rate that's established by the state. That's not something Three Village sets up and says, we're going to charge this much. The state tells us what we can charge. That number for this year has gone up significantly. It's around 102,000 per student coming in for next year. It was about 90 some odd thousand this past year. So what we're showing you here is the expense side. So there's the revenue side and the expense side of this budget, and you're looking at these things. So when you're talking about maximization of classes, some of those classes have students in it from other districts. So if more of our students are coming in, before we see adding any more cross contracts, we must place our own students first. And it might mean that we cannot take any more cross contracts in certain areas if those numbers are still climbing. And just like last year, where we were projecting about a 2% decrease in population, and we sort of leveled off now, we went up about 9 students from last year. So we're not, as opposed to what the governor's declining enrollment figure from, over 10 years, yes, over 10 years our enrollment declined. But from last year to this year, we're 9 students more. So we're up, we're not down. So that's the factor that we have to be careful. So we're starting to level off. We're not leveling off where Three Village was 10 years ago, where it was 7,000 plus students. We're not leveling off where Three Village was 20 years ago, was 8,000 to 9,000 students, or 30 years ago was 10,000 students. We're leveling off in the 5,000 range, or so. That's where our new number is falling into place. So as you've read probably statements in Newsday that we've made about what's going on in our community, as houses start to sell and younger families might move in, and if they have children, that might increase. That's the hope, but we have to be prepared for that, because if the level of services here is at this rate and the enrollment starts going up, we might see these numbers having to go up too. Another factor that I want to be complimentary to is I think the PPS department across the board in every area has done a remarkable job, not only within the department, but outside the department with the general education teachers too, being keen to identification of students with services or in need of services. I think that the trainings that we have done in the past 10 years have made more classroom teachers aware of what they're seeing in their classrooms, that it's not attributed to something like we can just pass by. They're really keenly aware of what there might be an issue with a child that needs to be addressed appropriately through a PPS type of service.
That's called Child Find, and it's required by state ed law. So we have to do that. If I could just add something that I left out. I wanted to talk a little bit about preschool, and as you were saying before about our kids incoming. Preschool is, we have our pre-K program here, but special education services for pre-K students are run through the county. That is outside of our school district and we have no jurisdiction or say over the county regulations for CPSE. But to give you an idea, as we're kind of floating our incoming numbers, right now we have 37 incoming pre-K students who are identified for self-contained classes for next year. And that includes 9 8s, 15 12s, and 13 DTC students from our incoming pre-K population. So, and that we will have to accept their IEP. We will have to find a placement and program for them. So that's a requirement, and that's something that we don't have a say in as far as how we vet them when they come to us. That's through the county.
And that's, just so you're aware, our current pre-K number is 186 students. So if we were a UPK program and that number went higher, that number would be even higher.
Kevin mentioned the tuition that we charge to other districts when they send kids to our programs. This year, we're receiving approximately $2.7 million in tuition from other school districts. We do not pay any other school district tuition. We do pay tuition to some of our students that attend BOCES schools or private schools, such as like a DDI or an ACLD or a program like that, which in their case is the least restrictive environment and the most appropriate placement for them. But we don't pay tuition to other regular school districts other than BOCES. But as I said, we're collecting about $2.7 million in tuition this year. Any other questions about this? Yes, sir.
I think you guys probably answered this before, but I'll ask it because I just don't remember the answer. As the numbers increase, are you looking at a cost benefit of perhaps farming some of these students out as opposed to keeping them here? If you have to create another class, so say that one kid makes you create another class, is there a point at which it's more cost effective to not create the class?
It certainly could be.
Okay.
And that is something, not every time a new student is identified, whether a new student moves in or just a student that we have is identified for a different placement. And that analysis is done every time. And generally speaking, if we can provide the service, it's cheaper for us to do. Almost always. Would you say, Erin?
100%.
Yeah, it almost always is, because we have the infrastructure in place. One of the very expensive pieces of special education, especially when you're talking private schools or BOCES, is transportation. It can cost a lot. We have some kids who are costing over $10,000 a month, right? Just for transportation, $10,000 a month, which is $100,000 a year. That's just to drive that student to school and home every day. So if all else being equal, it's much cheaper to do in-house, if just for that alone. There's no, DDI is not that far, but some of the BOCES schools are pretty far.
Yeah.
And it's very costly transportation.
And when students attend an outside placement, we pay per service, so it's the classroom, it's the TA or the aide, we pay for the OT, we pay for the PT, we pay for the speech, so we pay for all of those individually. They typically don't decrease support services, and we can absorb our students into our existing staffing for those types of related service supports.
Any other questions about anything Erin covered this evening? Okay, not that you can't come back to it, but,
Thanks.
all right, do you want to talk about state aid and where we are?
Sure.
We're not?
So, we're nowhere. The governor obviously did not relent. She had continued, she had an opportunity within 30 days to pull back her proposal. She did not do so. So we're waiting for Friday, and don't hold your breath for Friday. The first is just a number that exists in legislation, but they're not going to be beholden to that. It will probably, or hope for sometime next week to see what the Assembly and the Senate comes back with. We've received assurances from every representative in our area, from representatives of both parties in Albany, that they're going to try to restore this, if not increase it as well. But until that is actually given to us in some type of proposal, we have to operate as if it's going to happen. So that's, and the timeliness again of this, once more, is the third week in April, we must have a budget proposed to the board that they adopt and goes to the community that has to be received for a vote by the third week in May. So it's getting to be crunch time. March is a long month. Let's hope that things will get through. But the idea that a state budget will be on the table by April 1st, as it's supposed to be, is also, a pipe dream as well. If we have some assurances, at least, that the governor is not going to veto whatever proposal comes forward, and again, the Democratic Party has a supermajority in both the Assembly and the Senate. They can overturn her veto at any point if they wish to. And it seems, from everything that has been reported, that both parties, it's the only unified factor that has occurred in the state between both parties at this point, that they're dead set against this component of the budget from the governor's office. So we'll see what goes on, but as soon as we know, we'll let the community know. We have a board meeting next week. If anything comes up between now and then, one of the items on next week's agenda for the Board of Education meeting is a preliminary budget look to see what we are looking at as far as some numbers. We know what our tax cap is going to be. We'll announce that publicly at the next meeting. So we'll see where it's going. At the same time, we are also looking at, we have 4 incentives going on now with 4 different units in the district, waiting to see how many people are going to retire from that system. That will help provide some assistance. That we were doing prior to this governor proposal. That started in December with the discussions back and forth with that. So that may help us as we move forward. But inevitably, even if we do get money from the state, there are probably going to need to be cuts in areas just for the fact that we have declining enrollment at the secondary level. The elementary level is not declining as much, and we definitely have needs in some areas. We have some needs in some departments as well, which we'll need to address, E&L and special education being 2 of them. We also looked at a psychologist being added just because of the numbers that we have. So that's where we're currently sitting with everything going on right now. So it's sort of, we're in a waiting game at this point in time.
And Dr. Scanlon, as far as the timing is concerned, we have to have our budget approved.
3rd week in April.
So we won't know what the state does before we have to have our,
Well, we could, if we have at least an inkling from, the Assembly is, and the Senate is going to do this, we can sort of plan accordingly. So right now, we're in the midst of planning 2 different types of budgets, one with the cuts and one without the cuts. I will just let you know, the one with the cuts is disastrous. We met, thanks to Brian Pickford today, with the president of NYSET here in Three Village. She came down to speak with the team here and took a tour of many of the programs in the district. She's also assuring us that they're fighting the good fight on their end. I'm going to the conference for the New York State School Superintendents this weekend for Lobby Day. We'll be up in Albany. We are one of the hardest hit districts in the state, so it's appropriate that I'm there and trying to advocate for us getting some of the money back. So we're doing everything in our power, spending a lot of time and energy seeking every support possible. Everyone we've spoken to, including the board members that went to the Legislative Assembly meeting in Longwood this year, everyone is assuring us that things are going to be restored. But again, as I said, until we have something concrete, we have to plan 2 ways. It's not easy to do that. Jeff can tell you. It's one or the other. And a lot of things out there in social media have been thrown around. A lot of things have been sent to me directly about you should cut this, you should take that out, you should do this, you should do. I want to give some credence to some, and other things like, no, we cannot do that. We cannot go to one-room schoolhouses. That was a suggestion of moving 4 grade levels into 1 classroom and having 1 teacher. Last time I saw that was on Little House on the Prairie. That's not going to happen anymore. So we can't do things like that. And the programs we're looking at trying to put in place are to keep up with our counterpart districts that are doing these things before over the course of years that we haven't done. So we're sort of catching up in some areas as well. But we should be still very proud of some of the programs we have. But we made it quite clear today with the president of NYSET, all these great ideas, all these great programs, and including special education programs, they're not immune to budget cuts. So neither is E&L. Everything will be affected in this district if it's close to 10 million. It's not 8.9 million. It's close to 10 million because we don't have a UPK program. So that $1 million extra they threw in there to say, oh, you can get another $1 million. We don't have that program, so we don't qualify. And we're a high wealth district, so the cost of the UPK program is not going to cover the full cost of what it would cost us to do here in this district. And despite the issue with being identified as high wealth, our poverty level is at 14%. It's 10% higher than it was 10 years ago. Those factors are not changing. So, and our demographics are changing dramatically. So we need to be attentive to that. So this is going to have a major impact if we don't do something. I urge everyone in the community, anyone that's watching at home, anyone here, if you haven't written letters, keep writing letters. You need to keep us on the forefront of the senators' minds and the assemblymen's minds as they're looking at this. The district cannot be used, students in the state should not be used as a bargaining chip for some other political ploy, whatever it might be. So we need to be very, very vigilant on keeping up the pressure in the state. So So I again thank Brian for bringing her down. She was fabulous, very supportive of the programs.
She was, and thank you for hosting her. But, you know, she's hearing from a lot of the legislators as they're reaching back out to her and hearing the pressure from New York State United Teachers to restore these cuts. And they're saying, Melinda, take your foot off the gas. We're good. We're going to get this. And she said, until it is done, our foot's not coming off the gas. And that's the same from, it should be the same from all of us. But it's definitely coming from our end as well.
As Dr. Scanlon mentioned, our board can wait till about the third week of April to adopt the budget. That's the latest it possibly could. Our board is scheduled to adopt the budget at the Board of Education meeting of April 3rd. If it seemed like it might make a difference to wait that another couple of weeks, we could do that. But as of right now, it's scheduled, our last meet, we have 4 more meetings scheduled after tonight. Excuse me. And at that 4th meeting, which is April 2nd, the night before the board is scheduled to adopt the budget, that would be our last meeting here. And that was, you know, we would hope to wrap everything up. You have your recommendation to the board, and then the board meets the following night. Hopefully that timeline still works, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with the state budget. In previous years, for the state budget to be late is nothing new. There was a stretch of years, it was something like 20-something years in a row, the state budget was late. And some years, it's supposed to be done April 1st. There was some years it wasn't done until August. And we'd guess as to what we would be getting in state aid. And if the guess is, are we going to get a 2% increase, 3% increase, 4% increase maybe, that's one thing. Whether it's $10 million reduction or not, that's a different story. So we'll see what happens with the state budget. If it looks like it might help to wait that couple of weeks, we can do that. And then maybe even add another meeting for this group to talk about that when we get the state aid numbers in. So with that, a lot of the budget that we're putting together is still such an unknown because we don't know about that state aid. But I'll go over some of the other, oops,
He's switching you. Right?
sorry.
Hey.
No, the other one, but the page before it. Yeah, okay. So this is, we kind of call undistributed expenses. That's a term that the comptroller's office uses. And some of these aren't exactly fall into that category, but you'll see what I mean. They're more or less fixed expenses, fixed but based on staffing. So, for instance, when we talk retirement system, Social Security, health insurance, that kind of thing, it's based on staffing levels, right? But the numbers themselves are what they are for given that staffing. So I'll just run down these quick. Debt service and capital. So debt service, that is our bond payments. So we have a couple of outstanding bonds. Our total bond principal balance due as of this coming up June is $62.2 million. And this represents the principal and interest on those bonds. Almost all of our bonds will be paid off, current bonds, by 2032, with the remainder 2034. We do receive building aid on this. We receive 66% on most of it. There is actually some of that we're paying that we're actually getting 82.5% building aid back on. We get the building aid back on the principal payment plus interest. We get the interest, building aid on the interest as well. Also, capital, that's included in that as well. That's capital projects that we would be putting in the budget. For next year, what we would be including in the budget is the money to do the work at Ward Melville High School in order to accommodate 9th grade moving there in September of 2025. That any money in debt service and capital is outside the tax cap. And what I mean by that is, doesn't mean it doesn't have to get paid for. What it means is if that number gets lowered, it doesn't provide, that money can't be used for anything else. It can only be used for debt service, or capital. That's all it can be used for. And the reason for that is when the tax cap law first went into place in 2012, the state legislature did not want school districts to have to choose between educational programs and taking care of the buildings. So that's why they kept the debt service and capital outside the calculation of the tax cap. So whatever we need for that is on top of whatever the tax cap would have provided for. ERS and TRS, that's the two retirement systems, employees' retirement system and teachers' retirement system. All school district full-time employees in New York State have to belong to one of those two retirement systems. That's mandated. And part-timers, it's up to their option if they want to join. Most employees contribute something towards the retirement system. Well, all did at some point. And since 2010, Tier 5 went into place. Everybody contributes. Tier 5 and Tier 5 and Tier 6 contribute throughout their career. Tiers 3 and 4 only contribute for 10 years. Tiers 1 and 2 did not have to contribute. We don't have any Tier 1 members left. And I think that ended 1971, I think.
Don't make Carol feel alone.
We had a couple until not too long ago, but we have no more Tier 1 members left. So ERS, the employees' retirement system, that's more or less our non-instructional staff, all our civil service staff. And the rate that's charged, that's governed by the Office of the State Comptroller. And the rates, it's a percentage of salaries, and it varies by the different tiers of what those people are, tiers 1 through 6. The lower the tier number, Tier 1 would pay the highest. We would pay in the highest percentage, Tier 6 the lowest. Because the benefits, basically, the higher number tier, the less benefits. And that's how they make changes in the long term. When Tier 4 started in 1983. This is both for ERS and TRS. Tier 4 started in 1983. Tier 5 didn't start until 2010. But once that goes into place, it's in the state constitution that the current retirement system tier benefits can't be changed. So when they want to make a change to the benefits, they create a new tier. So they did that in 2010, created Tier 5, and then in 2012 then they decided they didn't go far enough with Tier 5, so created Tier 6 in 2012. So we pay the least amount in for Tier 12.
Tier 6.
Tier 12.
We're not going to be here for Tier 12.
Tier 12, oh my God.
None of us.
Yeah, Anthony is still there. So we pay the least amount in for the more recent tiers. Teachers' retirement system is done a little bit differently. That's governed. It's a separate body that governs itself. There's a board of directors. The ERS is all state comptroller. TRS is a separate body all by itself. Same. The tiers. The benefits are virtually identical. The tiers, the years, all the different tiers took place, all the same. The benefits are, like I said, virtually identical. How we pay into it is a little bit different. TRS, we pay 1 percentage rate for everybody, for all of our what they call certificated staff, all of our teachers, teaching assistants, and administrators. We pay 1 percentage rate. It doesn't matter what tier they're in. We pay 1 percentage rate, and that rate fluctuates. It's been as high as 16, 17%. Actually, there were some years where it was probably over 20%. And then it's been as low as 0 point whatever percent. And when those numbers go up, it's you can see here in our budget for next year, based on current staffing, we have almost a $1.5 million increase in the budget, and no kids see anything from that. That's just a percentage increase going up. Health and dental, our health insurance, we're part of a self-insured consortium with 2 other school districts. It's Smithtown and South Country School District. The benefits more or less mirror the NYSHIP, which is New York State Health Insurance Plan, otherwise known as Empire. Those are used those terms interchangeably a lot. And one thing, a common, well, I didn't really, when I started in Three Village, and I thought, well, how could a health plan that's based on Long Island possibly compete with a statewide plan, right, where the costs are spread throughout the state? Well, upon further investigation, now I did this probably maybe even 10 years ago, so that, but at the time, outside of New York City's on its own, outside of Long Island, Westchester, Rockland, Dutchess, and Putnam counties, and Albany. Outside of those, there was one school district in the entire state that belonged to NYSHIP. Because upstate, medical costs are a lot lower, of course, than they are in Long Island. All of those districts upstate belong to self-insured consortiums, because otherwise they would be subsidizing Long Island, and they don't want to do that. So most of the, from a school district standpoint, districts that are part of NYSHIP or Empire are on Long Island and Westchester, Rockland area, the most expensive areas of the state. So that makes a little more sense when you say, well, how can we compare? So our rates right now are actually substantially lower. Empire had a big increase this year and a big increase last year. It went up by about 12 or 13% this past year. Actually, it's 12.1%. Our rate for next year is going up 6.1%. So by comparison, we're getting off pretty good on that. It's still, between that and dental, almost a $2.4 million increase. Now, as I said, based on what the staffing is, if we're seeing a $10 million reduction in state aid, of course, we're going to have to make some changes in our staffing. The fewer people we have on staff, the fewer people we pay health insurance and retirement system costs for. So these numbers would change based on any staffing changes. Again, these projected numbers are based on current staffing. Social Security is just like anybody else pays. Our employees, just like everyone else, when you get your paycheck, you see a deduction for Social Security. It's 6.2% is for Social Security, and 1.45% up to a certain dollar amount is for Medicare, and the employer matches that, pays the 7.65%. This is our 7.65%. That's that cost. The other benefits include unemployment, disability, workers' compensation, and life insurance. I mentioned a little bit last time, I think, Nancy, you had a question about the unemployment insurance. We're self-insured for unemployment insurance and workers' comp. Now, that's not the same as being self-insured for, let's say, like car insurance. That's something different. If you own a business and you have to fill out, every quarter, you would fill out New York State unemployment insurance form, it's called an IA-5, and you pay a percentage of salaries that you pay to employees, you pay a percentage of that into the unemployment insurance. If employees or former employees of yours collect unemployment, you let them go, they collect more than what you've paid in, they're going to increase your rate to make up for that. So it's not like a true insurance plan that you would have. A business is always going to pay all of their former employees' unemployment insurance costs and then some. Same with workers' compensation. We're self-insured for both of those because we're allowed to be, which always is going to save us money. We only pay for any employees that collect unemployment insurance or any employees that collect workers' compensation. Transportation is our school buses. We almost all of our transportation is done through Suffolk Transportation. We used to have two separate bus companies. During COVID, one of those bus companies went out of business, and we did a request for proposals. We got a few proposals in, and who was our big bus contractor at the time, Suffolk Transportation, won that contract, so they do all of our busing now. They're very good. We like them a lot. The increase that they get each year is based on the increase in the Consumer Price Index, as determined by the State Education Department. We won't know the exact percentage increase until May, when the state sets that, but it will probably be in the 3 to 4% range. The reason I don't have that much of an increase proposed for next year is because based on, we always look at our routing and see if we can cut out a bus or two, and when we can, we do. So we'd be able to reduce by a bus or two, mainly based on change in enrollment. So it's not that big of an increase for next year.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, sir.
So when we're thinking about, several of our board members have been talking about 5-year planning with budgets. So it's difficult to do that when the tax cap is determined on a yearly basis. They don't say, this is the tax cap for the next 5 years. It's every single year is different. So within that, if we started to plan for a 5-year proposal here, by 2027, all the bus companies and any school district that owns its own buses has to start converting over to electric buses. That is a state mandate currently. So the legislature is trying to fight that now. We heard about that at the meeting that we had with them. By 2035, the entire fleets, everything, there can be no more diesel-powered buses. And as I mentioned, ironically, that's actually a fallacy, because the cold weather has determined that electric batteries don't work too well in cold weather. Even the current electric buses have to have some diesel motors on them to keep heat going on them. So they didn't plan for the Northeast in snow and cold weather, and probably the Midwest too. So, so that's a factor. So with that number, I just want to caution us here, if you are continuing on this role as a BAC member in the next few years, you're going to see that number start to go up exponentially, because the bus companies have to start buying those buses. They can't buy all of them at once, obviously. They got to do it over a course of time. So we are going to be governed by whatever that comes out to be. So look at that number now and think back on it 10 years from now, how cheap it was to
Back
have
in
the
the good
buses.
old days.
The good old days about having diesel buses, because it's not going to be that number forever.
And if that continues, we're also going to have to budget for capital to upgrade our infrastructure in order to do charging stations for all those buses.
Well, it depends if, how long the batteries last and what they can do with them. So, one of our heads of security here is also very involved with the fire department. We're a little concerned about the battery fire he's been talking about with the Tesla batteries that have come out. So how the fire doesn't go out. They've submerged the vehicles underwater, buried them, they dig them up, they pull them out of the water, and the batteries go back on fire again. So it's kind of frightening what that could be if a bus of 60 some odd children were driving in and the bus went on fire.
Gives a new meaning to eternal flame.
Yes, yeah, it doesn't go out. So it's kind of scary to think about. So let's hope the technology gets better before something bad happens when this goes down the line.
And with transportation, so occasionally, I'm sorry, was there a question?
I was thinking about your unemployment insurance.
Oh, okay.
Is that an actual clause written into your contract per employee? Or how does it apply? Is there an expiration date? Is there a certain percentage to the salary that the person being excess is collecting?
Well, it's the same as any other employee in the state. If somebody is let go, now if somebody resigns from a position, they're not eligible for unemployment, right? Same, whether it be for us or any other business in New York State. If they're let go because they punched their boss in the mouth, they're probably not going to get unemployment.
Right.
If they're let go because they're not performing well, they get unemployment. If they're excessed because we don't have a place for them, they're eligible for unemployment. And how much they get, it's same as any other employee. And there's a maximum dollar amount per week for a certain number of weeks. It will change during COVID, but it's no different from us than anyone else.
So I don't know what the current unemployment situation is. Is it 6 months, a year with the state? You know, I'm just thinking about the possible employees that you might be accessing if
Well,
you do
yes,
downsize.
so.
And that carrying cost in addition to.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So if we get to the point where we have to excess employees, right? So what we do is for every single employee that we have to excess, whether it's 1 or it's 10 or it's whatever. So for every single one, and let's just, and I'm not picking on teachers, but let's say we have to excess a teacher, right? So so when we look at, and when we get to the budget, we say, okay, well, the salary line is going to be decreased by the amount of salary that teacher would have been paid. The amount of Social Security line is going to be decreased by 7.65% of that person's salary. The retirement system line is going to be reduced by whatever percentage of that person's salary. The health insurance line is going to be reduced by whatever, if that person had individual or family health insurance coverage, whatever that cost was, that will be reduced by. And unemployment insurance, we will increase that budget line for a certain dollar amount, because some of those people, well, depending on how many we're talking about, we have to assume some of them will collect unemployment insurance. So that would be part of how much we save by reducing positions. That's part of that calculation.
So for instance, last year with the number of people that were accessed in the district at that time, many of them, almost all of them at this point, have either gotten jobs in other districts or are back employed with us in some capacity, whether it's back to a full-time teaching position or another position if it wasn't in the teaching area, or they're in another role in the district in some other capacity. So that honestly that saved us because we're not paying obviously unemployment insurance as soon as they were employed.
Right, so for the positions that we did access, as Dr. Scanlon mentioned, and some of those people who wound up, this was when as we saw last year, some school districts got enormous amounts of state aid increases last year, and they were doing a lot of hiring. So some of our people that were accessed wound up working for one of those districts. So if you take another job, you don't get unemployment insurance. So transportation. Oh, one more thing about transportation. So occasionally the question comes up, well, why don't we, now it's not a bid, it's called a request for proposals, because it's not just when we put out a transportation, if we're looking for a new transportation contract, it's not just a matter of who submits the lowest bid, right? It's not just low dollar. It's a request for proposals, and there's a whole scoring matrix put together to grade every company that submits a proposal, and then whoever scores the highest number of points wins. And it's based on a number of things. For transportation, it's based on cost as part of it, safety record, condition of their vehicles, proximity of a bus yard to the district, a lot of those kind of things. That company's financial history, financial soundness, their insurance coverage, it's all part of the scoring of the proposals. So sometimes, occasionally, a suggestion is made, why don't we just go out and do another request for proposals? It can only help. Actually, no, it can hurt a lot. Because if we go out and say, you know what, we're not going to renew at CPI, Consumer Price Index. That's what we can renew at. Now, we're not allowed to extend the contract for a year at anything more than that CPI. That's law. The State Ed Department says, let's say in May they come out for next year and say CPI for transportation contracts, the maximum allowable is 3%, let's say, right? So we can extend the contract with our current bus provider at that 3%. If they say, nah, we want 4%. Even if we say, yeah, you know what, 4%, we're okay with that because you do a great job for us, we're not allowed to. We can only do 3%. We can do a little less if they agree to it. But even that 3%, both sides have to agree. And if we say to them, yeah, we're not going to increase next year at CPI, we're going to go out and do a new RFP, request for proposals. Okay, so we do that, assuming they submit a proposal, maybe one or two other bus companies submit a proposal. It's not that many bus companies on Long Island, right? It's not like there's hundreds of them. There's only a handful. And as I mentioned, during COVID, one of the biggest bus providers that was on Long Island, it was Acme Bauman buses, they went out of business. So that was one fewer big company we had on Long Island, so less competition. And it's a big investment for a bus company to add a new district. So if you're a bus company out in Nassau County somewhere, and that's where your bus yard is, how are you going to provide service for three village schools? You probably can't. So there's not a whole lot of competition. So if we say, well, we're going out and doing a new proposal, if our current bus company submits a proposal and their cost that they put in is, I'm going to make up a number, 15% higher than what we're currently paying, they still might win that proposal. Or we can't then say, oh, you know what, never mind. Well, we're going to go back to CPI. It's too late then. So we're stuck at that 15%. So for the most part, unless we were unhappy with the service, we're happy to continue at CPI each year. That's getting back to what Dr. Scanlon mentioned. Come 2027, unless something changes, every bus that they buy has to be electric now. And the electric buses cost about 4 times as much. They work well, and I'm sure they'll work out all the bugs in them. And as also Kevin mentioned, they have a little diesel engine on board to provide the heat, because they have to provide the heat for the bus right now. They have to provide the heat for the bus. They have to keep the batteries warm, and they have to keep the batteries cool in the summer. So I'm sure eventually all of that will get worked out. By 2027, I don't know. But come 2027, my guess is our bus company will say, we can't continue at CPI. We're going to have to do another RFP. So I don't know that, but I would assume that's going to happen. And we don't know what the cost increase will be when that time comes. Legal and audit, we have 3 separate CPA firms that audit us. They do different things. We have an external auditor, an internal auditor, and an internal claims auditor. As I said, 3 separate independent CPA firms that audit everything we do in the business office, report to the Board of Education. We also have other audits, like from the State Comptroller's Office, sometimes the IRS, sometimes Department of Labor. They don't cost us anything, but the other auditors we do have to pay for. And then, of course, our attorney for the district. There's a lot of, the legal costs are really growing out of control for a number of reasons. It's a lot more litigious society. This past couple of years has been brutal in the legal services sense. The biggest thing of all was the Child Victims Act cases. So if you're not familiar with that, a few years ago, New York State legislature, signed into law by the governor, opened up a statute, or got rid of the statute of limitations for someone to bring claims for sexual abuse, no statute of limitations whatsoever. And there was a window, it closed a couple of years ago, but anybody who filed a case during that time, those are still being worked out. Ours, we had 3. One I don't think is going to go anywhere. 2 are settled or done, and I think we got, I don't know, I don't think we can divulge how much, but we got off pretty easy, especially if you've been following the news and you see what some other districts have made. So we made off pretty well. However, it did cost us, a pretty good amount of money in legal fees over the last couple of years. But those are done now. One of those went back to the 2, the one that I don't think will be anything, went back to the 1960s, and one was back to the 1980s. And so anyway, those are done now. So hopefully our legal, something else won't pop up next year. Insurance, P&L is property and liability. That's basically our property insurance, liability insurance. That always just goes up a couple of % a year. Our BOCES administrative charge. So we have to pay in to Eastern Suffolk, even if we didn't have a single student going to a BOCES school. The BOCES does more than just provide special education services. They have a lot of cooperative purchasing. They do a lot. But even if we didn't get one single, not a single thing from BOCES, we're still required to pay our share of their administrative costs. And for next year, that's going to be approximately $1 million. That's in there. And then any services we get from them would be vocational education or career and technical education, those kind of things, special education. That's in the appropriate area of the budget where we pay it out of. This is just for our share of their administrative charge. And the repay reserves, that goes back to the money that we had borrowed from reserves to keep schools open during COVID. It was the amount that we were allowed to take from reserves that has to get paid back was $2 million that year. And this is the third year of paying that back. Excuse me.
So the good news with that is, for this year coming forward, we are off the districts in financial distress list with the controller's office.
Right.
So
And we were susceptible to physical
susceptible
stress.
for this year, we're off.
Now we're not even, we
Not
don't
even
have
on
that.
that list.
Yes. And that relates to the reserves that we used during COVID.
So one of the quotes from the governor's budget was that, well, districts are sitting on huge amounts of reserves that they could tap in order to compensate for the cuts. While it is true for many districts, we used, as Jeff mentioned, during COVID, rightfully so, the board at the time decided to use reserves for an emergency purpose to keep our schools open. That's why you have reserves, for those emergency purposes. And we did so, and we hired the additional staff and brought in all the materials and everything else and kept us going throughout that entire time period. That money you see there is what we are paying back in order to do that. This situation that we're addressing, this is not an emergency. This isn't a plague. You could think it's a plague when you think about someone coming up with a number like that. That might be plague-like. But this is not an emergency type scenario that we might consider that type of thing. The board could take out a reserves for that. However, it's the extraordinary amount of money that it would require would probably put us back in financial distress again. And just to remind everyone, this is only the first blush at a cut. For next year, there's a two-part proposal here. It's another $5 million on top of the 8.9. So it's not just 8.9, and really it's 9.9 because we don't take the pre-K money. It would be another $5 million on top of that amount of money. So while you could do it for this year, what are you going to do next year then? Because you're going to be paying back those reserves, and then where are you going to borrow the money for the next gloss at this? So let's hope that wiser and cooler heads will prevail with this process, and we'll see how it goes.
So between these numbers and what Erin went over tonight, that's in a dollar standpoint, that's almost 55% of our budget for the current year. Would be similar for next year. As I said, when we know more about state aid and we have to adjust staffing, these numbers adjust also, as I mentioned. Fewer people on staff, less Social Security, less retirement system, less health insurance, et cetera. So now next week, we have another meeting next week. We have, as I said, we have 4 more meetings scheduled. For the next 3 meetings, we'll be going over all of the teaching, right? Outside of, everything Erin went over tonight, the special ed. We'll be going over the teaching. We'll be going over buildings and grounds. We have athletics, those kind of things. And please, if there's information you would like, please let me know. I'd rather, I want to get you everything you want to know in order to make,
Whatever
this most valuable for you. So, did you have anything else for tonight?
Any questions for anyone about any particular items?
I thought there was going to be a lot more discussion about Erin's stuff. You did a great job.
Can I just say one thing? Earlier you mentioned about the letter writing to the local representatives. If anybody is looking for that information, it's on our website, and it's easily found at contact villagecsd.org. That'll bring you directly to the Restore Foundation Aid to Our Schools page on our website. It has all the representatives' email addresses, and there's also an advocacy letter there that can just be copy and pasted in, so.
Great.
One more question. What do other districts carry their reserves at?
It's all over the place. And there's a couple of different ways to look at that too. A counterpart of mine from another district during COVID had said to me that it was around in April of that year, said they had to start spending more money because they kept spending so tight that year they were going to wind up with too much money left over. Now that was, and we were taking money out of reserves to keep schools open, and that was a district, I'm not going to say who it was, but it was another district who had kids coming to school 2 days a week. And even those 2 days a week, because I know from people who live there, they did nothing. So it was almost a waste of a year for them. And they took all that money that was paid in tax and they socked it in the bank, and it's sitting there. So some people would say, wow, that's great. They have $60 million in reserves sitting there. Or you could look at it from the point of view of, if you live here and you're paying taxes and you paid your share of that $60 million in your taxes, and instead of that money going to programs for your kids, the district took the money and stuck it in the bank. So there's two ways to look at it. And as far as how much in reserves, like I said, all over the place.
Have we ever used TAP into before other than COVID?
No. That was the one time we did that. And that's not easy to do, by the way. It's not like, that was special legislation that was passed by the state legislature allowing us to do that during COVID.
So just to give you a couple of quick pieces with that, I'm not trying to be political in any capacity with this. Another district in this county that is often compared to us and is comparable in size, our capital budget for this year is around $1.4 million, which we had to use all of that for the collapsing roof over at Setauket, plus some money out of reserves to help with that. We're proposing to go to $3 million for next year. Prior to COVID, prior to the budget being voted down a couple of years ago, it was at around $6 million. Same kind of district, similar to us, academically, athletically, all those things. They have $44 million in their capital budget, so in their reserve, $44 million. So that's, taxpayers have paid that. It's just sitting there. It's not being spent on anything. It's just sitting in the reserve account. Interest bearing, but it's the people that live in that community's tax dollars that the district is getting interest on, whereas if you didn't pay the high taxes, you would have gotten the interest on your own accounts. So it's a philosophical viewpoint of whether that's appropriate or not to do to a community. I think in this community that people are aware enough that if we tried to attempt to do something that large amount of money over a course of time, there would be people at every board meeting jumping up and down saying, what are you doing? And probably rightfully so. Yeah.
What this district did during COVID was exceptional. And what we did is we kept our students engaged, and we had less than the impact for our students. For 100%, that money was well spent. I know it's catch up, and I know it's definitely, hard to do, and there's a lot of questions to be answered. So, Jeff, just one question. When you said capital projects for moving the ninth graders up to the high school, how much would that capital projects cost? And is that with associated other expenses? What does the capital projects cost?
We estimate around $2 million to be safe. It could be less. We don't want.
Right, just for that, yeah.
Yes.
We would,
Of the
our
$3 million.
plan is to put $3 million in next year's budget for capital, not all for that, because we always need bathroom repairs, asbestos abatement,
no matter what.
those kind of things. Some of our boiler valves, that kind of stuff. But about $2 million for the,
And that's only for the high school. There's no other changes that need to be made in any of the other schools at the present time.
And is there a breakdown of what that $2 million is going to go for? Is it
Well,
viewable?
it's within the, John Grill is going to give us a breakdown when he does the report for us for, what each area is going to cost. Right now, it's 3 earth science labs, conversion of the north side locker bank into a faculty room, Um, uh, We needed 2 more instructional spaces, rehearsal spaces in the music wing, another art room. Those are all from the study that was done by the team with Alan Baum.
And that will be, where will that be? Where will that breakdown be? Is it out there right now?
No,
Or
it's
what
not. He still has to do it for us yet, when we
Okay.
put the proposal. Again, remember, the budget isn't proposed yet, so, you know, if this is going in, we need that data from him to put that forward, so. I thought you were gonna go down a path with the data for a second. So Laura Pimentel, if you haven't had a chance to go on the district website and look at the CIO's report that was done a few months ago about we have had questions from some board members about learning loss and how comparatively we've done. Exactly to that point, because we have kept students in during COVID and to now, our learning loss in comparison to other districts that had kids in there only 2 days a week is minimal in comparison. And even those students that, as Erin is saying, as they come in early stages, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, we do universal screenings 3 times a year in the elementary level. We see massive increases in their performance levels very shortly. So by 3rd and 4th grade, they're gone. So, and again, the longer we have them, the more we progress. But I've looked at data in my own home district, and I've looked at data in other districts comparable to us, they're still experiencing large learning loss issues all the way up into their middle school levels because they were not in full-time or appropriately in an amount of time for their students to have gained that knowledge. So you'll see high reading loss levels in high schools. And that's not to mean that we don't have students that have that. We sadly have students that come to our district that are functionally illiterate and they're juniors in high school. So we have that right now. So
That's definitely the educational piece, but the social emotional piece, the rebound that we have, has been exponentially faster because of that, for you, 100% sure.
And just so you know, when I mentioned the $2 million that we have to repay to reserves for what we use that year, that's the minimum that we have to repay to reserves, which I won't go into the whole lengthy discussion on why
especially
that
at
is.
8:30.
However, what we spent that year, additional cost to keep schools open was over $7 million is what we actually spent. The $2 million is the minimum that has to get repaid to reserves. So, but it was a lot of money, and our board, we heard from the community, right, Anthony? You were here for the meetings that summer, and the community said, whatever you got to do. You have money in reserves, what do you have it there for if you're not going to use it now? And good point. And that's what our board said to do, whatever you have to do to keep schools open, and we did. So one of the few districts anywhere, and not to sound dramatic about it, but anywhere literally in the world that did that kind of thing. So anyway, so that's all we have for tonight. Please, if there's information you're looking for that you're not getting, well, you know, we have a lot more to go, but I mean, if something in particular you want, please let me know. And any questions, feel free, email.
So
anything.
before all of you leave, I just want to give you another point of information. Any of the numbers that we've been quoting from the strategic plan or to you tonight with data that's gone on for the past 10 years, all of these are state reportable numbers. They are on the New York State Education Department's website. They come directly from our CIO. The enrollment numbers that you see that we go, those enrollment numbers change weekly. We do a weekly report. So sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down. Some schools may be this high, some schools may be this low. They constantly change. Kids and families move in and move out on a regular basis. The registrar's office is in the front of the building here. It's there. So all of those numbers are not fictitious. They are not made up by me or by Jeff or by Erin or anyone else that's working in the district. They are what we have to report to the State Education Department. They exist on that site. So you can go to the State Education Department portal. You can type in 3 Village. You can go back any number of years and you will see all of those numbers, enrollments, percentages, any of those things all reported there. That's what we're required to do under regulations. So anything we have used in any of our presentations all reflect those numbers as we've gone through. So please, if you don't believe anything we're watching, go on, take a look yourselves. We're happy to, if you see a mistake or an error that you think we didn't report, it may, if we were looking at enrollment numbers, it may be we're using our current numbers as opposed to what the state is. That report goes in last year for last year's numbers. So it's not, the current year's numbers actually don't get finalized till around August to November. So this year's current numbers won't be official until that time period. So that's how long it takes sometimes for some of them to go through. So please, please check those out. Look at any of those, and if you have any questions about that, please let us know. We'll be happy to answer anything with that as well. Have a good night.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.